era where it looked completely different as right now. It's changed quite a bit since then. So for me, SEO is really far more than a list of keywords with their search volumes and keyword difficulty. It's actually a long-term strategy and doesn't work from day one to another, as some of the people might assume. But I think that when it's done right, it really taps into people's actual search intent. It responds to their questions in the right way, and it has the power to convert visitors to the leads and also generate a significant ROI also in the B2B space. And that is what Adriana Stein is going to focus on today. Just a few words about Adriana. She is a passionate and experienced marketer here at Zengrowth. She works mostly for B2B tech industry and helps companies increase revenue and grow their brand through, as well as connect to their target audience through inbound and growth marketing tactics. She's originally from the US and now she's based in Germany. She obviously specializes in SEO and content marketing, which is what she does mostly here at Zengrowth, as well as marketing automation. And then in her free time, she also enjoys cooking, hiking, and traveling. So I'll give it away to you, Adriana, and also just a few words that we are recording this session. So the recording will be available afterwards. We'll send it by email. If you have any questions throughout her presentations, just post them on comments in Zoom and we'll get back to them at the end. Take it away, Adriana.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Marta, for the introduction. That's a pretty descriptive explanation of what I do. So I don't have a whole lot more to add to that before I start the presentation. But I just wanted to double check, can everyone see my screen? Is it large enough?
I think we're not sharing it. We don't see your screen.
Oh, it's not sharing.
No.
It says it is in presenter view. Okay, well, this is why I wanted to double check. So let's see then. Maybe I have to do the full screen. Let's see.
You should have the right to share the screen.
Now it's presenting. Yeah, now you're sharing it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think I have to do this one. There, did that work?
Yep, yeah, it works now. Perfect.
Okay, awesome, cool. So let's get started. Today I'm going to talk about how to turn your keyword list into your SEO strategy. Here's a little bit about me and my LinkedIn profile if anyone wants to chat afterwards, or you can also connect with me at Zengrowth. And so what I'm going to cover today is basically the 4 core pieces of an SEO audit. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an audit per se. You could take it rather as doing any sort of development for your SEO strategy with an on-page focus. But the process will include, from my perspective and what we cover today, the audit portion in the beginning where we start with that, how to put that data into a content map or a keyword map. If you haven't heard of what that is before, no problem. I will explain that a little bit more later. How to choose your focus keywords and also your related keywords. And then a bit on the end about how to continually optimize your content plan and your SEO strategy. So there are a lot of different ways to do an SEO audit. There are a lot of different things that we can look at. And SEO involves a lot of different stuff. I'm going to go over to this slide first and then come back. So I really love this Maslow's hierarchy of SEO needs. And this covers basically everything that you would want to look at in your entire SEO strategy. So it could be content, of course, it can be keywords, it can be also things like backlinks, it can be site speed, so things like core web vitals, which are super important, especially as of the latest algorithm update. But today we're going to focus largely on the content and the keyword part, which is, I would say, still the meat of where the value of SEO strategy lies. So when we look at an SEO audit with an on-page focus, there are a couple things or a few things that I would always tend to include if you want to take a really comprehensive approach to it. So this includes the state of SEO, a competitor analysis, keyword gap analysis, keyword analysis, content map, and action plan. So I know that's really jargony, but I'm going to explain a little bit further about what each of those mean. So when we say the state of SEO, why does this matter? Well, you first have to start to understand where your domain is at. And I tend to use Semrush is my preferred SEO tool, but a lot of tools like Moz or Ahrefs, or even if you use Ubersuggest, they're going to have similar functionalities. Usually paid tools will have a little bit more in-depth information, but you can get some good starter information from free tools, I think, too. So the screenshots today will largely refer to Semrush. And if you have questions on other tools, feel free to save those for the end, and maybe I can give you some pointers there. But so when I tend to look at what's actually going on with the state of SEO for one of our projects at Zengrowth, then we start with the domain overview section. So it's highlighted here where you would find this in Semrush. And I've given DocuSign as just a basic example. This information is publicly available, so you can look at any domain in existence, and you can even filter it per each different market, which is really useful if you have a multi-country, multi-language, or a global strategy, and just get a basic understanding of what's actually happening on this domain. So a few key things that I tend to look at are mainly the authority score. This is one of the first ones. So although it's not a metric that is confirmed as existing per se by Google, basically all SEO tools do have some sort of score, like authority score, domain authority. I think there's a third one, but basically it all kind of stems from the original concept of PageRank, which in other words means your maturity, your state of maturity of your domain, and is basically how likely or how less difficult, let's say, it is to rank for certain keywords. So when you're going through and choosing the types of keywords that you want to use in your strategy, then one of the biggest things you'll want to look at is what is your authority score. So the higher the authority score you have, then the easier it is to rank for keywords with higher difficulty. And you can see DocuSign has a pretty high authority score. If you're sort of on average, it's maybe around 30 or so. And the longer that your domain is in existence, so like 2 years, for example, would have a lesser authority score than a domain that's been around for 5 years. And if you have a brand new domain, then it's probably only 0. And it's nothing to worry about. If you're starting at 0, you always build up from there, and even it should automatically go up just by time. But of course, good content and also backlinks make a pretty big difference there as well. The second thing that you'll want to look at here is the organic search traffic. This is equally as important. So DocuSign, of course, as of April, they had nearly 2 million organic monthly search traffic per month. So of course they're a pretty successful website with a good SEO strategy. Don't worry if you're not there yet. It's totally possible once you scale. So you could look at DocuSign as sort of a goal that you would like to accomplish in the future. And the next big thing would be backlinks. So this is kind of an issue that some people think backlinks don't matter and some people say they do, and how does that work versus content? My answer is the most frustrating answer an SEO can give, which is it depends. It really depends on what's happening with your competitors and the keywords that they're shooting for and the backlinks that relate to those keywords, whether or not they matter. But generally speaking, in the SEO world, you can get kind of an idea of how well a domain is performing in total based on the general amount of backlinks. And the other side of that I would add would be it's always quality versus quantity. So if you have one backlink from like BBC or New York Times or something that's giving you press coverage, that's better than like 100 forum links that aren't going to do a whole lot. So you kind of have to consider this a bit manually, like how does this fit into my strategy? Do backlinks matter to my competitors? But just when you're starting to understand what do I actually want to do with my SEO strategy based on where I'm at, then you will want to take just a general look at backlinks that are listed on the domain overview section. And I will also say too that both backlinks and authority score may be totally different depending on the tool that you're using. So again, you kind of have to just get like a general guess about what those numbers are, but don't freak out if they're low or you don't have any. It's always something that you can improve on. So once you start to understand where your domain is at, then the next thing really is to look at your competitor analysis. So what is going on with your different competitors? And one important thing to look at, I think, so this is just a screenshot from Semrush, but underneath here towards the bottom, there's a section where Semrush actually lists the competitors that it perceives that you have. And one thing that's really important is that you want to make sure that whether or not they're really your true SEO competitors, because there's kind of a difference. There are business model competitors. So like one CRM to another CRM, those are going to be business model competitors, but maybe they have completely different industry targets. And so Semrush doesn't actually view them as a competitor because they talk about different topics. So sometimes there's a gap there from the information that it shows. So when you're looking at this portion, make sure you again do kind of some manual checking to make sure the competitors actually make sense. And one way you might kind of determine whether or not they do is to just do like a Google search of something based on the type of product or service that you're selling and see what results come up for exactly that. And that's a good idea to compare what Semrush says with the competitors that are listed there, and just get an idea of basically this same information from them. So look at how you compare in your domain overview versus their domain overview, and then start to get an idea of where they're at in their strategy, if there are things to improve on or not. In the case of DocuSign, then we can see that these organic competitors here, Semrush does, I think, largely have them correct. HelloSign, we see actually some cannibalization here with the Canadian version of DocuSign. PandaDoc and SignEasy definitely, I guess, DigiSign, or I haven't heard of them, but I would assume those are all basically both business model and SEO competitors. But if you have a specific niche, then it may be totally different. So a couple things that you'll want to look at when you're going through this information. The biggest thing is going to be a keyword gap analysis. So when you do a gap analysis, basically this means that you're comparing the keywords that you're ranking for versus the keywords that your competitors are ranking for. So Semrush allows you to compare up to 4 competitor domains. So I tend to look at my domain that I'm researching plus 4 others because it creates some really nice visuals. And then you compare top opportunities, missing. So these are keywords that your domain doesn't have rankings for, but everyone else does. If you have selected your competitors accurately, missing keywords are great ones that you can strive to create content for. And untapped is keywords for which your domain doesn't have rankings for, but at least one competitor does. So when you put that all together, this is it's the keyword gap section in Semrush here. And you can see that you put in your competitor domains here, and then you compare them, and it gives you this, even though it's called keyword gap, the visual is the keyword overlap. So it's actually just taking the data, but reverse. And it shows the keywords that you have in common. Top opportunities is this box here. And then below this is a longer spreadsheet where you can filter for these things. And that's a really good way to start your keyword analysis and start doing keyword research that you put into a longer list. So from there, now you start to understand where your domain is, where your competitors are, what keywords you might need to target in order to beat them. And then now you need to go a step further and decide, okay, what do I need to create content based on what I know from my own business strategy, how I want to be better for competitors, what industries or what audiences or what locations we want to target. All of these things need to be taken into consideration when you put together a keyword analysis. So basically, this is where you start doing your own manual keyword research. And this is with the keyword magic tool here in Semrush. And when you zoom in the keyword magic tool, then it gives you results like this. So like, for example, I've searched for electronic signature. Again, we're using DocuSign as the example. And these are the results that come up. And one thing I really recommend to do, so there's this section, this is called the keyword manager. And here you can create keyword lists that are really useful. It's like a database. So when you're going through and doing this keyword analysis, if you see these little plus buttons here, then you just make sure here, this is your new list is selected as the default, and then it just automatically adds them all to the list. So you won't want to go through and just do everything, right? Because you want to find the best keywords, the one that make the most sense for what you know your strategy should involve. And then those go into the keyword manager. And once you have all of that put together, because probably you have a lot of different topics that you're doing keyword research for, then that's all saved in this keyword manager. And then you have one list that you can very easily export, which is very helpful for the next section. So one of the most important things that I find is a really common error that we have at Zengrowth with some of our clients, and when we're doing a sort of audit like this, is we're checking, does the keywords that the content uses or the keywords that we are given from a list, does it actually match search intent? So search intent is super, super important because basically you have to think, what is the logic behind when someone searches for something, what are they trying to find? And if you try to create content that has a totally different type of information as opposed to the keyword that you've used, like you've answered a different question or you have different information, even if it's super well optimized for that keyword and you've created awesome content and it's set up really wonderfully, if it doesn't actually answer the question that they were looking for, then you've got a problem. So because probably you have an issue with bounce rates, and if you have a lot of bounce rates, so people leaving your site really quickly and they didn't find what they needed, that can actually affect your keyword rankings. So it can de-rank you or reduce your rankings because you have a mismatch with search intent. So that's, of course, Google's primary goal is always to match search intent. So you really have to honestly think like Google when you're trying to understand what search intent is. And I kind of take that personally from two perspectives. When I'm thinking about something in the context of the person, I think about the buyer persona. So a buyer persona is a fictional representation of your ideal customer. And I kind of put myself in their shoes and think, what would they want to search for when I'm doing keyword research? And then I would think, what information do they want to find by typing in that search? And that's how you really start to understand search intent. And you also have to think about, on the other side from Google, like there are sometimes some brand names or things that if you Google them, they could be lots of different things, really depending on what you mean. So you always just want to make sure that you're really checking that it actually matches the content that you create. And so generally speaking, there are usually 4 different types of search intent. At Zengrowth, we focus on tech companies and tech industry as our main client base. So I've given some more tech examples here, but informational would be something like, what is something type of software, or why should I use this software, or something around integration requirements, something like this. Commercial or investigation. So you want to find a type of software service provider, or you want to compare two different softwares. Transactional could be that you want a demo, and navigational could be like you're looking for this type of software about page, or this brand about page, something like this. So it's kind of helpful to put that into context. If you think of it like this, it's not always going to fit into this nice neat box like this example here. So just really try to think of it manually and logically, like you would if you're the person who's searching, because that's in the end who you want to become your customers. So the more that you can think like them, the better. So just a couple examples that are important, especially in the B2B world, is you always have to pay attention to consumer searches or B2B searches. So here I have an example with a consumer search for the keyword online banking versus a B2B search, online banking software. And you can really see the difference, especially in the descriptions that come up. This sounds like it could be for a private person, basically. And here you can see they're talking about financial institutions, white label online banking software. So if you're wondering whether a keyword is for a B2B audience or for a B2C audience, you can really just actually Google it and see what comes up with the competition, and just try to gauge whether it's one or the other. Sometimes it's a mix. So it's not always nice and easy to understand the difference. And sometimes, especially in B2B, you do have to make a very calculated decision about, okay, well, the search results for this keyword are mixed. B2B and B2C, should we really create content for it? And that's a situation where it just really depends on where you are in your SEO strategy and how important you think that content would be for your audience. But at the end of the day, just make sure that if it's not an investigation or a transaction or a navigational search intent, try to reduce selling people too much on that, because if they're still in the information stage of search intent and you go too deep into trying to sell, you can still lose people anyways, because the goal at the end of the day is you want them to convert, whether that's to become a lead or book a demo or whatever your marketing goal is. You want to make sure that this matches and that they're happy with the experience they had in that content, because they will remember you later on and come back if they were happy with it. Okay, so the next piece, how to do a content map, sometimes also known as a keyword map. And basically this means where you take your keyword list. So this is usually a combination of what you found from competitors and your keyword research, maybe even what keywords you're currently ranking for. And then you just put it all into one list and you build clusters. So clusters are groups of keywords that are matching a certain search intent. They are at the same point in the sales funnel, so top, middle of, or bottom of funnel. That usually matches search intent as well. And it also depends on the vertical that you use them in. So vertical are like groups of related pages, like your product pages, your industry pages, blogs, resource pages, guides, case studies, stuff like this. These are all groups of pages that would be put into a content vertical. So here you can see an example. This is again based on DocuSign, with different sorts of product pages here and different industry pages. So industry, I think it's pretty easy to see, like we have a physician, so like a doctor, and then legal documents could be for a lawyer, or it could be actually really anyone. Kind of depends on, we'd have to probably do a little bit more keyword research and make that one a bit more specific. And here's just sort of like informational content that would go in the blog. And there is a template for everything that I'm going to show in the next few slides that is kind of in the form of a spreadsheet. And I do really recommend that you do your keyword map or your content map in the form of a spreadsheet, because it's basically the perfect database for you to host your content strategy on. It's kind of a living, breathing document that you can update. So that's a really good way to think about that. One other thing that I would say here too is that blog content doesn't always necessarily need to be top of funnel. It can be a lot of the time. So top of funnel isn't just informational content. It really depends on how your site structure is set up. So where pages sit on your domain, how your navigation menu is set up, whether you have product pages and industry pages, or whether you have just a few product pages and then some resources. So this is not all like it has to be this way, that you need exactly this sole content vertical setup. But I do recommend in any case that you try to create verticals, because then it's easier to build on them. So like industries is one of the best places that I really see to do this, because once you have physician and legal documents, you can add any sort of other business. You can add banks, you can add grocery stores or supermarkets or retailers or something like this. I think you get the idea. And that is basically how you would scale your SEO strategy, is by building on all of your verticals. So this is also from the form of a spreadsheet. Again, this template is down here. So once you have your keyword list that is put into clusters, so groups of related keywords, then I recommend to lay it out on a spreadsheet basically like this. So you have your content vertical, which is blog. You have your topic, electronic signature requirements, the URL. The URL should match this focus keyword if possible, or as closely as possible without being super long. So we have our focus keyword, electronic signature requirements. You can see this URL is the same. And then we put basically the rest of the related keywords into a follow-up section here. And these keywords, this is actually what should become your headings in your content, or the sections in your content and what you'll talk about. Of course, you can add to it or take away from it as you need, depending on what you want to do with that content itself, the goal, how you plan to use it. But at least you know that this content is built on keywords that match each other, so they have a better chance of page ranking for multiple keywords. They make sense for the topic, so it's not covering too much or too little. And it's also really using your keywords strategically. And you can also add a little bit more information to this if it's helpful for you. You can add something like a status. You can add maybe your SEO title and your meta description. This is, let me go back here. So this is the SEO title, and this is the description, the stuff that comes up when you Google something. You can add proposed content updates if you're optimizing current content. So basically you just add as much information as useful for you, depending on where you're at in your strategy.
Adriana, just one question, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is about that particular slide. Should the URL structure include the word blog?
As a parent page, it's a good idea. And the reason why is because it organizes your sitemap, and the more organized your sitemap is, then the easier it is to crawl and index. So if anyone's new to SEO, your sitemap is basically this like skeleton of your whole website. And that's something usually you either submit through Google Search Console, or maybe if you use WordPress, there's a plugin for that where it's automatically done. But basically the URLs that you set up and the parent pages, a parent page is basically the page level that sits above the end URL. So in this case, the blog would be the parent page. So it would be like yourdomain.com/blog/electronic signature requirements. And do try to stick to this organized and consistent structure if you can, because that goes into your sitemap and then it's easier to crawl and index. Okay, so one really important thing that I like to stress when it comes to choosing the right keywords is to think about your SEO strategy, not just where it is now, but maybe even 2 years from now, or further, even 5 years from now. Because if we think back to DocuSign, well, how did they get nearly 2 million organic monthly traffic? They would have to try and rank for a bazillion keywords, right? Well, actually, yeah, that's kind of the idea. So instead of taking a high search volume approach when you're doing keyword mapping, I actually take it exactly the other way around and think of it first from a long tail focused keyword approach, and often even low search volume. And low search volume, especially for niche businesses or businesses who have a really saturated market, so there's lots of competition with lots of big companies that dominate the market. Long tail, low search volume, that's actually your SEO gold mine. So it's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually what you should really try to do, because a lot of the time, the long tail focus keywords, you can create content for exactly that. There's little keyword difficulty, or less at least, meaning it's easier to rank for, and it's really often associated with bottom of funnel, or at least middle of funnel searches. So something software, or something software for small businesses. So it's a very specific keyword you can create content for, and it's a lot easier to rank. And then basically, as you do this, just make sure that you always keep the user intent or the search intent in mind. So you make sure that matches. And when you have a low domain authority too, so if you're a new website, then again, this low search volume long tail is a really good way to go. And from there, so this is kind of the useful thing about clustering, is you can choose from there the best keyword that matches this low difficulty approach, and that also has good grammar, so that it doesn't sound like an SEO'd text. It sounds as natural as possible. And I've heard a lot of debates about whether, as an SEO, that we should create content first and then optimize it, or do our keyword research and then create content based on that. And I'm really for the second approach, because you make sure that you create content that there's always search volume for that content and those keywords. You find multiple keywords a lot of the time. I would say on average at least 4 or 5, if not more. Don't overdo it with like 50, but within reason. And then you can really try to strive for multiple keywords that have search volume, that are easier to rank for, and that are very search intent focused. So all of that kind of comes into this one process here, which I found in some of our projects, or really a lot of our projects at Zengrowth, that this has been a really worthwhile strategy. So a way of looking at it is, there's this general rule of thumb that if your domain authority is less than 30, then target key phrases or keywords that are fewer than 100 monthly searches and have 5 words in them. So same with less than 50, fewer than 1,000 monthly searches, 4 words, less than 70, fewer than 3,000, 3 words. And this really ensures that you create a realistic SEO strategy. So we always say that SEO takes 6 to 12 months or so to really take off, which is really the case. And I would say for most businesses who haven't been doing their SEO strategy for years already. So if you want to put together a plan that has your stakeholders happy about that investment, then I really think taking this low search volume approach and the long tail keyword approach is going to be a whole lot more effective over a shorter time frame. And you can actually have revenue impact on that, as long as you choose as much as possible bottom of funnel, high purchase intent keywords. So in the software world, think of like something software Debo, something software for X industry business. So as close as possible to the product that you're trying to sell. And just to give a quick example of how I would go through this when doing keyword research. So I searched in Semrush here for accounting software. So that could theoretically be a bottom of funnel search term, but we can see here really high search volume, quite high keyword difficulty. So it would be better instead to maybe your software isn't free, so it's not possible, but really don't be afraid to scroll all the way down to fewer than 100 search volume and just see what comes up. One thing I tend to do sometimes too is use this keyword difficulty filter, and you can put it by the lowest keyword difficulty, so the other way around, and then scroll up, and then basically it will show you what has the highest search volume with the lowest keyword difficulty. And that's kind of a keyword research trick that I like to use. Okay, so the last part of this is what can you do in terms of optimization, because SEO is an ongoing thing. It should never just stop, and it's never a one-time thing that you do once and then you just let it sit, because the bigger or the more monthly traffic that you can gain from SEO, like if we think about in the context of DocuSign, how much revenue that brings in because they've scaled it so high, it's really a lot. It's quite monumental. So always try to think of your keyword strategy again from 2 years, from 5 years from now, and make sure you keep up with it. So don't let content just really sit there fished. Always keep track of it and see what you can optimize. So maybe do something like a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then put that into proposed next steps and maybe an estimated budget. That could be for an agency or for in-house. Probably need a budget for your SEO strategy. You could schedule an SEO audit update. So go through the process that basically I've walked you through here. Maybe if it's a follow-up audit, then it doesn't need to be as extensive. But I definitely do recommend, if you can do every 3 months, if you're in e-commerce, you should definitely do every 3 months, because you probably have a huge amount of pages. But if you're like in B2B tech and you don't have such a huge website, maybe every 6 months is okay, but really no less than once a year, because there is so much opportunity and low-hanging fruit and just making little tweaks to content and updating it based on some optimization opportunities. So, and again, as long as you're writing content, then go back to your keyword map and make sure, does this make sense with the rest of our content? Is the content ranking for a keyword that we didn't intend? Do we need to change it? Do we need to switch some of our verticals around? For example, like if this one was not specific enough and we needed something more specific. So just make sure that you're always going back and reviewing that. And then just really track your content performance and make tweaks as you go. There's a lot of really good data in Google Analytics that you'll want to take a look at as well. And Google Analytics has like literally all data you could probably think of when it comes to content performance. So just take a look there and compare that to how people are interacting with the content that you create, whether they're staying on the page, whether they're going to a conversion landing page after one of your SEO pages, what they're reading. Another great tool for this is Hotjar too, so you can see if they've clicked on a certain CTA or if they read a certain area of the content for a longer time and then what they did after that. These are all things that you should really be doing on a regular basis to make sure that your SEO strategy is bringing in the most impact to your business. And then one last thing I will add for Semrush is this section called position tracking, which I'm going to give a little bit of an overview in Semrush where to find all of this stuff that I've gone over just quickly before we end. But this is really the main place that I would go to in order to understand how do I actually optimize my my SEO content. So when you have your cluster, so this is your focus keyword plus your related keywords. Let's say you created this page or you optimized this page, whatever the case may be, then it's live. Then go into position tracking and add those keywords here. So you add it as a tag, but you basically add these keywords here, and then you tag at the bottom the name of the page. So here I just have an example with blog. Probably it's better if you're a little bit more descriptive what page that actually was. But then go from there, and then you can actually filter this later, so you can see a whole idea of how well your entire keyword cluster is performing, which I think is really useful. So let's say that your domain authority is a whole lot bigger and you have a whole lot more monthly traffic. Then you can try to think about, okay, maybe some of those higher search volume keywords that I couldn't rank for in the beginning and we're not quite ranking for with this content now, maybe I can create new content or optimize my current content because I see that it's sitting there around ranking 30 or ranking 20. And it's just right on the verge, but it just needs to be tweaked a little bit. So that's really useful to go into this section. Okay, so I'm just going to give a very quick recap here in Semrush. So we went over the domain overview section. This is where you'll find all of the basic publicly available data on domains. We went over the keyword gap. So this is where you can find the different competitor information. You can actually do the same with backlink gap too. You can also put in 4 different domains here. There's a lot of really good data that it brings up. If you have a higher subscription to Semrush, then it gives you even more, especially for competitor stuff. So there's a whole section under competitive research, which is really good if you're in the process of scaling your SEO strategy or really bringing it to the next level. Then I definitely recommend to go through some of this, like Market Explorer, really useful for viewing how you are across different markets in different countries. Where you do your keyword research is this section. So you type in something here, accounting software. And then it will bring up your results here. This is the keyword manager section where I mentioned you can host your list. So you would create your list here. And one other thing maybe about keyword research here is you can come at it from a little bit different angles for each keyword. So if you don't find something that's exact enough from broad match, usually I start in broad match just to get an idea, then maybe you can look at some other versions in phrase, or you want really exact keyword or related keyword. It will give you some nice ideas for long tail, low search volume to compare that keyword across a couple different views. And then here's the position tracking section. So I can't show this slide for long because there's some protected data there, but basically this is what it looks like when you have some data to come in. So I think that's it. If you create a position tracking project, then you just basically set it up in this project area, but that's it. So.
Cool, thank you so much. I've learned a bit myself as well. We do have a few very in-depth questions. So the first one is from Alex, and it's about the keyword cannibalization. In particular, when it comes to optimizing for long tail keywords that you mentioned, where there are similar variations of those, but the content is different. How would you go about that and deal with this?
Can you give a bit more context on what the issue is there? Because it kind of depends if are you a global company, a local company, or?
Alex, if you want to speak up, and if you want to maybe post on B2B tech, he's saying.
B2B tech? Yeah. Let me see if I can see here. I can pull up the chat here. B2B tech.
Yeah, the question is a bit higher up. Keyword cannibalization.
Let me go back here. This one, I think, right? Yeah. You do with. Okay. Yeah. So here is where a keyword map is super important because it helps you avoid this situation really happening. But if you do have the situation where you have two different competing pieces, so basically what keyword cannibalization means for anyone who's new to the topic is when you have multiple pages that are competing to rank for the same keyword. So basically you've become your own competitor. This does happen sometimes, and it's a little bit unavoidable if you're really scaling your SEO strategy. Also, if you think about HubSpot, if you type in something related to inbound marketing for HubSpot, you may see like 5 different pages from HubSpot, and that happens at that point. But when you're starting out, or even when you're just in the middle, you want to make sure that you try to separate your keywords out as much as possible, and really try to not create extra content, because you might think, okay, yeah, it's great that I have 2 pages that are ranking, so they both have a higher chance of getting that click. But the other thing to think about in that regard is that you could be using those keywords to rank a little bit better on a different page, on a completely other page that doesn't compete, and rank higher. So you cover more of your entire domain visibility. Domain visibility is the percent, it's like a qualified of how much Google sees your domain across all rankings. So one thing you can do if you really can't switch the content out somehow is you can add a canonical, and a canonical is basically this little like tag in your coding, or you can also do it in Yoast. This is a SEO plugin for WordPress, where you basically tell Google, okay, yeah, we're keeping this original content. So let's say the content that you don't want to compete against one that you really want to keep, you can put a canonical URL to the one that you want Google to focus on, and say, basically, this is the one I want you to look at, or we're not going to get rid of the other one. So it's sort of a pointer. It doesn't always work. It's not like you flip on this canonical and then automatically cannibalization goes away. But that's one thing that you can do. If you have a lot of redirects in place, then the canonical can kind of be an issue, because sometimes they overwrite each other. So it's a little bit difficult. But that's what I would do in that situation if it's not possible to change your content. But if you can change your content, that's probably the first thing I'd consider. Change your content and try to use your keywords a bit more strategically.
Perfect. Thank you, Adriana. And also there are 2 more, but one more, maybe I'll start with this one, which is about keywords as well. Would you recommend the amount of keywords a startup in B2B tech industry should focus on to be as effective as possible, roughly, of course? It's from Georgie, who believes that trying to get high ranking on lots of keywords would not be so effective.
So yeah, here's an answer again. It depends. It largely depends on what there is search volume for, and how you actually plan to use all of that content, which is what you would organize in a keyword map. So it's very important to, as Marta said at the beginning of this webinar, don't think of keywords just as a keyword list. It should, a keyword list is like, basically you put out all your ingredients for dinner and you just left them and said, okay, I'm going to eat now. But you still have a whole tomato, a whole onion, some uncooked pasta. You can't eat that. Well, it's the same with SEO, that you have to really put them together. So mix in your keyword ingredients properly and make sure that they have a result that is what you're looking for within your business. So start by looking at what has search volume, then compare search intent, then compare competitors, then compare what you actually, what your business goals are, and then go from there. So there's I can't really give like a set number. It doesn't make sense. It really depends on the certain context at hand. But I generally think the more keywords that you can find that fit within those conditions, the better.
Yeah, and also match them to the type of content. Like for Zengrowth, I can say that maybe for the super bottom of the funnel search, we might have 5-10 core ones that our homepage, for example, would address, or service page. Then we would have maybe 15-30 40 for the services pages, but then we might have hundreds for the blog, and they're super long tail and super specific. So like Adriana said, just mapping it up to the type of search. And there's one more from Georgie addressing bad backlinks. So when your competitors pollute you, which is a horrible move, but still happens, how would you defend yourself from these low ranking backlinks?
So you can actually disavow them. There's a way to disavow them. If you do a backlink audit, you can find the ones that are toxic in Semrush. It will give you a list, and then you can disavow them. I think if I remember correctly, it's through Google Search Console. And disavowing basically means that it doesn't remove them, but Google doesn't look at them anymore. So they don't add to the toxicity of your strategy. That's also something you should definitely do at least every 6 months or so, because it's terrible that competitors are doing that still. I hope that they wouldn't, but I guess if it still happens, that it's something you got to pay attention to.
Definitely a black hat SEO tactic.
Yeah, yes.
And one more from Alex. Would you recommend creating blog content focused on more general keywords that would link to blog posts that are content related, but more focused and optimized for long tail keywords, like a skyscraper approach?
Focus on more general keywords. Again, as my answer is kind of, it depends. I think I would probably frustrate you all by saying this. It depends on where you're at in your SEO strategy. So if you've used all of your bottom of funnel and middle of funnel keywords across the rest of your website, then I guess your blog could start to focus on more general keywords just to scale. So that would be one reason to use that. But if you're not at that point yet, then I'm really a fan of being a lot more specific. So as specific as possible, because then it matches search intent. So with skyscraper is, maybe my perspective is a little bit different, but my feeling on skyscraper is that very specific kind of idea. So you create a very long form piece. In the B2B tech world, it's often a buyer's guide, or it could be a really long how-to guide, or a software comparison guide, or a provider comparison guide. So it still answers a very specific set of keywords, and it does that in a really in-depth manner. And that's really what skyscraper is you create this really long form but easy to read and easy to digest piece of content that answers very specific keywords. But if you mean skyscraper in a different way, then please feel free to add more into the chat and I can comment back on that.
Cool, thank you. And one more, actually from me also, any tips for ranking in people also ask, which Google now suggests? It's such a used section, I think, in Google lately. And once you start getting it as a person doing search, you never get out of it, because it just keeps on opening and proposing new questions, and you go into a rabbit hole. But as a person doing SEO, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so my very simple answer would be just to create content that matches people also ask, because that's what gets put there anyways, is content that answers those questions. So when you're doing your keyword research and when you're coming up with what you should actually put in your content, as in which sections and which headings, then you can literally just Google those keywords and see what comes up under people also ask, and then those become sections in your content. So that's an easier way. I won't say easy, but it's an easier way to get one of those as a featured snippet.
Cool. Yeah, I think also there's a way in Semrush with the magic keywords tool that gives you questions, right? You can actually go to questions and see what people are asking, and there is a very long tail and super low search volume, but B2B, that's what we want.
Exactly. Yeah. Answer the Public is also really good for questions too. That gives you some great ideas.
Cool. And related to that, Alex also asks, do you optimize blogs to appear in featured snippets to increase CTR in SERPs? Maybe can explain that to other people. What is the featured snippet?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different types of feature snippets. People also ask, is one of them. Basically, it's a lot of different forms. It can be an image, it can be a Google My Business section that comes up for local business. It can be a map, an actual map, again, for local business. It really depends on what you're searching for. But basically, these are all little parts of things that show towards the top of the search results in order to increase the click-through rate. So definitely you should be optimizing all of your content as much as possible for this. How you would do it really depends on your industry and what the content is for. We just discussed one for people also ask. One for images is the alt image text. So when you have, for example, like an infographic that really matches what your content is about, which is a perfect place to go into a blog, then you can put your focus keyword into the alt image text, and that image can then come up as a featured snippet as an image. So that's a really good way to do that too.
Okay, perfect. I think we have no more questions. Do we? Just giving 30 seconds.
Yeah. Any last questions on here?
Yeah. Well, if not, we will send out the email with the recording of this webinar, so you can also share it with the ones who might have missed it, or go back to the sections that were interesting to you. And we'll share a template as well that Adriana mentioned that we prepared for you, where you can actually do your audit and planning all in there. We can just simply, duplicate the doc or the Google Sheet and use it for yourself. And also one more note is that we are actually hiring also a junior SEO specialist for Zengrowth. So if you would like to join our team or know someone who is interested, we'll add the link to apply in that email as well. I think with that, we can wrap up. Thank you once more for attending and for all the questions. I learned a lot quite myself. And yes, thank you. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.